Today I stand before the court, no longer a victim without a voice, but a survivor courageously ready to share my story. Our justice system is set up in such a way that it would rather protect the rights of the defendant than those of the victim. Oregon judges and other court officials are not required to have any training on the dynamics of domestic violence or trauma-informed care. Because of these inadequacies within our justice system, I, like many others, have been perpetually re-victimized by the courts during this process. Domestic violence is defined as a pattern of behavior used by the perpetrator to maintain power and control over the victim in an intimate relationship. Domestic violence does not discriminate. Anyone of any race, age, sexual orientation, religion, or gender can be a victim or perpetrator of domestic violence. It can happen to people who are married, living together, or who are dating. It affects people of all socioeconomic backgrounds and education levels. I believe it's important for the court to understand this because Mr. Waterbury is an officer of the law, and as a result, I, the victim, have been treated unfairly by our justice system. Because of his powerful role in law enforcement, several agencies, including the Washington County Sheriff's Office, refused to believe that I was a victim of Mr. Waterbury's abuse. In fact, the Sheriff's Office allowed the defendant to continue working as a patrol deputy for over a year after allegations of misconduct and abuse were made. It wasn't until April of 2017, more than a year after the initial investigation was launched, that Mr. Waterbury was placed on paid administrative leave. This was due to a recording that was released in which you can very clearly hear Mr. Waterbury verbally abusing his family. He remained on paid leave until well after he was arrested in September of 2017. He was then placed on unpaid leave, but still maintained his status as an employee with Washington County. Mr. Waterbury presents well in court. He has a prestigious career and a spotless reputation. He comes from a wealthy family and enjoyed a wonderful childhood. But the powerful position Mr. Waterbury holds with the Sheriff's Office and his flawless background does not mean that he is incapable of abusing another human being. I am a survivor of domestic violence, and as a result, I struggle with post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm low income and do not have strong family ties. The work I do is primarily within the nonprofit sector, and I struggle to make ends meet. In addition, there is a negative stigma that comes with being a survivor. My credibility is challenged because of these differences, which are beyond my control. In 2010, I survived a brutal attack at the hands of my then husband. He abused me almost daily for 3 years. I was called degrading names, beaten, sexually assaulted, and isolated from all family and friends. On the day of the last attack, my husband threw me up against a wall, strangled me, and held me hostage at gunpoint in our home in New York. I was able to escape, but my abuser stood between my son and I, and so I was forced to run for help without my 11-month-old child. I was 6 months pregnant and barefoot, running through the snow until a neighbor happened to see me and invited me into her home where we called for help. My children and I survived that awful day, and we started over here in Oregon. A year and a half later, in July of 2012, I entered a relationship with Brian Waterbury. I was open and honest about my history of being abused, and I made it abundantly clear that any form of violent behavior would be unacceptable to me. Mr. Waterbury was aware of my ambition to become an advocate and at first supported me in my endeavors. He too shared about his past relationship and openly admitted that his ex-wife destroyed him. As recent as a month ago, Mr. Waterbury reiterated how sorry he was for making me pay for someone else's mistakes. He treated me poorly because he was once treated that way, or so he claimed. Mr. Waterbury abused me in many ways throughout our 5.5-year relationship. The irreversible damage he and his family have caused will affect my life for years to come. However, I refuse to allow Mr. Waterbury's actions or the actions of those associated with him to destroy me. Just as I overcame my past, I will overcome this. Brian Waterbury, your hateful words, threats, and manipulation were meant to instill fear in me. And while you succeeded for quite some time, I'm here today to say no more. I defended you during the very first investigation conducted by Tigard Police Department. I went against my own morals and values when I lied to Lieutenant Michael Eskew to protect your livelihood, selflessly taking the blame for your actions. The investigation was closed and you were exonerated from all allegations. During that investigation, you allowed your family and friends to believe that I wrongfully accused you and that I was the reason your life began to fall apart. Your sister-in-law and ex-wife contacted Lieutenant Eskew and slandered my name with lies in an effort to defend you and destroy me. You simply allowed it to happen by never speaking up, disregarding my livelihood, and how those reports might negatively affect my life. Brian, you did intentionally strangle me. You weren't sleeping, nor was I. It wasn't a joke, and I did not simply brush it off. I was afraid, angry, and hurt. But still, I defended you because I cared about your well-being over my own, and I feared what consequences I'd face by going forward against you. You harmed me several times between 2015 and today, both physically and emotionally. When I went to the hospital to have my hand checked out, I assured the doctor that it was an accident. That was just another lie I told to protect you. And again, when you wrapped your arm around me back in September, attempting to keep me in a chokehold, I defended you. I was given the opportunity to have you arrested that day, but I refused. The most recent incident, on January 24th, Mr. Waterbury called me several times screaming at me, despite the release agreement which stated that he was to have no contact with his victim. He claimed he was losing his mind over and over again. Mr. Waterbury has access to several firearms, even though a stipulation of his initial release agreement stated that he was not allowed to be in possession of such weapons. I was told that the release agreement did not give officers the authority to remove the weapons. However, a restraining order would indeed authorize police to confiscate the firearms. When I asked an advocate at the Domestic Violence Resource Center to help me fill out the restraining order packet, specifically the part regarding firearms, the advocate immediately asked me what my abuser did for work. I shared that Mr. Waterbury was a deputy with the sheriff's office. The young man who was assisting me explained that judges prefer not to remove firearms from perpetrators who are in law enforcement because it negatively affects their ability to work. At that moment, I broke down in tears. Not because it was a surprise, but because I had feared that that would be the case. This is just another example of how our justice system fails to keep survivors safe. Despite all the turmoil Mr. Waterbury has caused in my life, I am still very passionate about the work I do as a domestic violence advocate. I'm a very active volunteer in my community. I have helped with law enforcement trainings both locally and at the police academy. I am a speaker on the Domestic Violence Survivors Impact Panel, which enables me to share my story with men who batter in hopes that they can change. I am a full-time student at Portland Community College, where I have maintained a 4.0 for the last 3 terms. I'm also employed with Portland Community College as an in-class aide, assisting students with disabilities. I ask that Your Honor realizes that I am not just another docket number, but I am a human being whose life matters. I deserve justice regardless of who my abuser is. I know that we are here today to hold Mr. Waterbury accountable for the crimes he's committed and hopefully give me the closure I deserve. It is clear that the defendant has little remorse for the pain he's caused not only me, but my children as well. My sweet little boys have watched their mother be victimized by Mr. Waterbury and the justice system for over 2 years. It absolutely breaks my heart to think of the trauma my babies have experienced because of this case. Throughout this investigation and court process, I've been accused of being a liar and emotionally unstable. I have lost jobs and missed out on other opportunities due to this lengthy case. Mr. Waterbury always minimized his abuse towards me by stating that he wasn't near as bad as my ex-husband. But Brian, you knew what I had been through and the abuse I had endured in the past, and you chose to put me through it again. And because of that, you are far worse than he ever was. Ruben's abuse occurred more frequently, but abuse is abuse. You were much more calculating and manipulative with your violent behavior. That doesn't make you a better man. That makes you a coward. Mr. Waterbury's behavior has not only caused me severe emotional anguish, but has put a huge financial burden on me. It's a constant struggle to keep a roof over my head, pay my utilities, and it's rare that I can afford groceries. My children need new clothing and school supplies. But because we've been uprooted, I cannot afford these essential things for my children right now. I do not have a wealthy mother and father who supports me like Mr. Waterbury does. I do it all on my own. I only wanted to share this with the court to show Your Honor how devastating it can be to leave. It's just not that simple. The physical damage Mr. Waterbury caused has faded. However, the emotional impact the abuse has had on my life will never go away. I constantly check the doors in my apartment to ensure they are locked at all times, and I am always looking over my shoulder. I have nightmares of the abuse, and I experience frequent panic attacks. My health has been significantly affected by the stress of this 2-year case as well. I do apologize for how long this impact statement has been, but I'd like to end with this. Brian, I forgive you. And I forgive your friends and family who bullied me for the duration of this case. You, Brian, are the one who could not love, not me. You are the one with a character flaw, not me. Just like my past experience with abuse, I could let this destroy me, but I won't. I will take this experience and turn it into something good. I choose forgiveness. I choose happiness. And I hope one day you can forgive yourself as well. I just pray that you treat the next woman with love and respect and only touch her in loving ways. I believe people can change, and I hope that you are one of those people. Thank you for showing me exactly what I don't want in a partner. Thank you, Your Honor, for giving me this opportunity to share how Mr. Waterbury's behavior has affected my life. I appreciate it more than you'll ever know.